Bleach immerses itself in the rich tapestry of philosophies and mythologies, drawing inspiration from Buddhism and Hinduism, particularly evident in his world-building that mirrors the samsara cycle. However, Tite Kubo skillfully weaves contrasting philosophical threads into the narrative, prominently incorporating Friedrich Nietzsche's ideas. As we delve into the thematic intricacies of Bleach, Nietzsche's influence becomes a fascinating lens through which we can examine the character's motivations and the overarching philosophical underpinnings of the series. The Prelude chapters, Chapter 0, The Sand, and The Rotator, serve a crucial role in setting the emotional and thematic groundwork for the series, particularly through the lens of its main protagonist, Ichigo Kurosaki. These chapters are instrumental in providing a deeper understanding of Ichigo's psychological state before the pivotal events that transform his life in Chapter 1. The narrative in The Sand delves into Ichigo's internal fears and his perception of his own powerlessness. Despite his ability to interact with ghosts, he is tormented by the unknown, especially what lies beyond death. This fear is not just abstract, but is made tangible through his experiences, such as seeing spots of blood left by the spirits or sensing their fears. This personal anguish is exemplified when he brings a toy to a child who was a victim of a hollow, highlighting his empathy and his frustration at his inability to do more. The comparison of fate to a millstone and humans to grist underscore a feeling of inevitability and helplessness against the cycles of life and death. The imagery of the spinning world, touching the sun and the moon and constantly changing, yet leaving Ichigo's powerlessness unaltered, deepens the sense of a preordained path that one cannot escape. Ichigo's yearning for strength to break away from this cycle of powerlessness is a critical moment that defines his character's trajectory. His wish for a strong blade and the power to shatter fate is not just a call for physical strength, but also a desire for agency, to make a difference in the cyclical and seemingly predetermined nature of existence. The rotator mentioned in Rukia's Prelude chapter gives us an insight into Rukia's mental and emotional state as she embarks on her assignment in Karakura Town. Rukia's feelings of loneliness and abandonment, especially in relation to Byakuya, her brother, who appears indifferent to her, depicts her inner turmoil and desire for familial connections. As a Shinigami in the Koete, where professionalism eclipses emotions, she sought out love from her brother through the same professionalism that constrained her. Byakuya's declaration that he refrained from intervening in her execution due to the established rules exemplifies the inhumane nature of their society. The metaphor of the rotator vividly encapsulates the essence of eternal recurrence. It suggests a universe where events and experiences are perpetually in motion, cycling through phases of existence without a crucial beginning or end. The cyclical pattern can be likened to Nietzsche's concept, wherein every action, choice and moment is doomed to repeat infinitely. For characters like Ichigo and Rukia, this cyclical nature is not just a backdrop, but a fundamental aspect of the existential struggle. Their personal battles, emotional turmoil, and the overarching narrative of confronting and overcoming adversities are all framed within this repeating cycle. Ichigo's and Rukia's engagement with the cyclical realities can be seen as an allegory for Nietzsche's challenge posed by the idea of eternal recurrence. The characters are not merely fighting external threats, but also internally wrestling with the meaning of their actions and existence within a universe that seems indifferent and repetitive. Ichigo's desire for a strong blade to shatter fate can be interpreted as a refusal to succumb to this nihilistic despair that might arise from accepting the eternal recurrence for an unchanging fate. His fight against powerlessness and predetermined destiny is emblematic of the struggle to affirm one's life choices. Ichigo's internal struggle and his yearning for a strong blade to shatter fate vividly embody Nietzsche's concept of self-overcoming, a core aspect of the will to power. This philosophical notion is not merely about asserting dominance, but represents a profound drive for personal growth, transformation, and the redefinition of one's own limitations. Nietzsche's exploration of morality through the lens of self-overcoming resonates with Ichigo's journey, as he seeks not only to understand his own moral compass, but to transcend the boundaries it imposes. Ichigo's quest is a testament to the Nietzschean ideal of becoming more than one is, by harnessing the intrinsic drive to expand one's capabilities and influence. Nietzsche's vision of an extra-moral age where morality is fully comprehended and re-evaluated based on the principle of self-overcoming mirrors Ichigo's personal evolution. As Ichigo confronts and overcomes the challenges laid before him, he engages in a process of re-evaluation, questioning and reshaping the values and beliefs that define his existence. By embracing the concept of self-overcoming, Ichigo exemplifies the Nietzschean pursuit of transcending conventional morality to forge a path grounded in personal strength and self-determination. This narrative arc not only highlights the struggle against external adversities, but also underscores the internal battle for autonomy and the creation of one's destiny. Through Ichigo's story, we see a vivid illustration of the will to power as a dynamic force for self-transformation and the redefinition of one's place in the world. Nietzsche suggests that the affirmation of eternal recurrence is the ultimate embrace of one's life, with all its pain, joy, and struggle, as worthy living over infinitely. This is heavily contrasted at the end of the series with Yhwach's philosophy of the true world. Yhwach's goal in Bleach was to destroy death and create a war world, a true world where fear of death is eliminated. Yhwach's vision of a unified world where life and death are intertwined harks back to a primordial age before the artificial segmentation into the three distinct realms. This vision resonates with a Nietzschean critique of the true world concept, where Nietzsche challenges the Platonic idea of a transcendent world of forms that is more real than our apparent world. Nietzsche argues against the notion of a higher, separate reality, a true world, and instead emphasizes the value and reality of this world, the one we live in and experience. Yhwach's attempt to create a world without death, where the cycles of life and death are abolished, fundamentally conflicts with the Nietzschean affirmation of life's cyclical nature. Yhwach seeks to remove an essential aspect of existence that contributes to the creation of meaning and value within the cycle. This creates a paradox. While aiming to liberate humanity from the fear of death, Yhwach's vision may also strip life of its depth, as the struggles, growth, and transformations that arise from the interplay of life and death are nullified. The narrative backbone of Bleach concerns itself with the notion of the heart or the soul. It emphasizes the importance of the formless. Much of Ichigo's character growth is linked to his overcoming of fear of the unknown, which in Ichigo's case is his fear of death, but it also might be a reflection of his past traumas. Kubo emphasizes this point by making it an integral part of the power system. Simply speaking, the more one understands and accepts themselves, the more power they can attain. Nietzsche calls this the will of power. In a lot of ways, Ichigo mirrors the Wanderer, a character of Nietzsche that is emblematic of his philosophy of knowledge and truth. This wanderer has conversations with his own shadow, which symbolizes self-consciousness. The shadow represents the mental constructs of our identity, Nietzsche says, the ongoing story we tell ourselves about who we are, our experiences, beliefs, and desires and fears. This narrative is not fixed, however. It evolves with our experiences and reflections, much like how a shadow changes its shape and presence with the movement of light. It suggests that self-knowledge and enlightenment, represented by light, bring forth the shadow. In other words, the more we seek knowledge and understanding, the more pronounced the self becomes, casting a shadow that is shaped by our increased awareness and insights. And when Ichigo learns the truth about the death of his mother, who is emblematic of the sun or a source of light, Ichigo's self becomes more pronounced, and therefore his wishes in the Prelude chapters come into fruition. However, coming to this profound understanding is not easy. Nietzsche says in order for these concepts of self-understanding and self-overcoming to take place, we need challenge and adversity. Nietzsche says that reason is itself an instrument of man's will and logic. Nietzsche suggests that our reasoning, emotions, and intellect are all expressions of our will, and the way that the will manifests itself in our experience is as impulses, which are themselves reducible to this will. This means that impulse must overcome impulse, and will must overcome will. Ichigo wants to protect people even from a very young age. It starts with his mother at first, then his family is involved, and then this extends to people he doesn't even know. Memories in the Rain, the third volume of Bleach, is perhaps the most important volume in Ichigo's character arc thus far. It's the story of Ichigo's psychological growth through his younger years, and he aims to explain his will to power, his desire to protect. Isshin, his father, explained to Ichigo that his name means the one who protects. As the older sibling in the family, one cannot help but internalize the idea. Ichigo grows to hate his younger self, however. He blames himself for taking Masaki away from his family and from the world. She was the sun that illuminated the family, the center of their universe. He curses his weakness for not being able to protect his mother and living up to his name. This is why he accepts Rukia's request to become a Shinigami in Chapter 1, to specifically protect his family. He doesn't want to be a substitute Shinigami, however. He only took the powers onto himself to protect his family. He cannot afford to be the altruistic bundle of joy that he once was, because it is that same mindset that led to the death of his mother. In the end, he accepts Rukia's request to become a Shinigami, not to protect others, but to repay the debt to Rukia. And when he meets Grand Fisher again, the hollow that killed Masaki, Ichigo's guilt and trauma resurfaces, and he rushes in without a prior thought. However, he is completely outmatched. The memory of that rainy day clouds any sort of cool judgment he displayed beforehand. When he regains consciousness, he makes his way to Masaki's grave and laments at his failure to avenge Masaki. Here he learns a very crucial lesson, told to him by his father Isshin. Instead of self-loathing at his inability to change the past, he should look to honor her last moments and take the lessons of Masaki's sacrifice and make the most of it. He frees Ichigo from his chains of fate he subjected himself to, and it is here he gains the desire to be stronger, his second will to power. And this Nietzschean philosophy of self and truth is the backbone of the Substitute Shinigami arc. This idea runs parallel with Ichigo's friends Chad, Orihime, and Uryu. Chad and Orihime are characters who have faced discrimination for aspects they were born with, the color of the skin and hair respectively. For Chad, it's delving into the profound lesson imparted by his grandfather that shapes his character. His grandfather's wisdom emphasized using physical strength not for harm but to safeguard, instilling kindness as a guiding principle. Reflecting on this transformative conversation and aspiring for greater strength, Chad taps into extraordinary power, activating his Fullbringer abilities, specifically the manifestation of the right arm of the giant. Fullbringers are uniquely tied to the defining aspect of the identity, and for Chad, it is his robust physique, the source of pride and a symbol of his heritage. This affinity materializes into an armor enveloping his entire right arm, providing augmented strength and durability. While these revelations propel Chad into a realm of heightened abilities, the mysteries surrounding his newfound powers and their connections to spiritual entities persist, leaving him with a quest for understanding. For Orihime, this is her will to power, to overcome the fear of the unknown. Unlike Chad, she has already attained a heightened level of spiritual energy, enabling her to perceive spiritual entities. It is in this dire moment that Orihime activates her Fullbringer abilities, the Shinshonrika, or 6 princess shielding flowers, materializing from her hairpin, a memento associated with her late brother, and her long hair symbolizing her trust in Tatsuki. Much like Chad, Orihime endured bullying for an inherent trait, her hair color. Tatsuki, her steadfast friend who shielded her since her brother's demise, fostered an environment where Orihime felt secure enough to grow her hair again. Only when she expresses a fervent desire to protect Tatsuki does Orihime unleash her powers. Uryu's character also acts as a foil to Ichigo. He is also haunted by the same trauma of losing someone close to him to a hollow. However, unlike Ichigo, who points his hate towards himself, Uryu does so at the Shinigami, the agents of death who are supposed to be responsible for the hollows. Uryu venerated Soken, his grandfather, who worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between Quincy and Shinigami, and just like Ichigo, who takes the role of protecting the people he cares about, Uryu treads the path of his grandfather. However, this philosophy is only achieved after his altercation with Ichigo. As said before, his power is synonymous with an understanding of the self and the world around, and perhaps it is because of this aspect that Ichigo is able to sympathize with a huge array of personalities from Uryu to even Yhwach at the end of the series. By fully embracing these integral aspects of their identity, they are rewarded with powers exceeding their imaginations. And throughout the story, Ichigo is that force of change. The narrative of the Substitute Shinigami arc underscores a profound message about self-acceptance and self-overcoming, embracing every facet, even those beyond one's control, such as height, skin, color, and racial background. The idea of self-acceptance and self-overcoming is further explored in the Broken Coda, Volume 7 of Bleach. Just as in Memories of the Rain, he loses Masaki due to his weakness and in turn losing his desire to protect. Here he loses Ruke, who represents his desire of power to protect. And again he is immersed in a torrential downpour of rain, indicative of Ichigo's mental turmoil outside and inside in his inner world. However, Urahara arrives at the scene, a spectator that has been monitoring Ichigo's progress from the very first chapter. He tells Ichigo to confront his own weaknesses and fears, and that this involves him venturing into the unknown. He needs to go into his inner world and learn the name of his Zanpakuto. As we learned during the Thousand Year Blood War arc, names hold significant meaning, because in essence a Zanpakuto is an extension of a Shinigami's soul. Not knowing the name is not knowing yourself. And when he meets All-Man Zangetsu, who is actually the representation of his Quincy powers, he can't say his name. This is due to Ichibe's doing, removing the name Yhwach. Therefore, All-Man Zangetsu lies and tells him that his name is Zangetsu. This marks the convergence of the Blade and me. Ichigo finds himself descending into profound self-reflection, grappling with intense self-criticism and doubt regarding his actions, fears, and overall resolve. The moment encapsulates fear as Ichigo's initial formidable adversary, persisting through the narrative. However, it is fear that empowers Ichigo. Life or death situation is the fastest way to increase one's strength, as Aizen says in the Arrancar arc. Evolution requires fear, the fear that one will perish if one remains stagnant. Ichigo's primary will is rooted in his first order will, the protection of others, particularly evident in his determination to safeguard his family and friends during the Substitute Shinigami arc, and eventually Ruke and the friends accompanying him to the Soul Society. This resolve necessitates an increase in strength, a requirement that materializes in the crucible of life or death situations. Confronted with the imminent fear of death, Ichigo faces and conquers his fear through his resolute will to protect and his unyielding determination to emerge victorious. This pivotal moment where he attains this heightened power serves as a testament to his will to power, the aspect of his character that seeks to overcome resistance. This aspect of Ichigo's journey of self-actualization brings up an interesting point in Nietzsche's conceptualization of self. Nietzsche rejects the unified concept of the self, portraying it as a complex entity with contradictory drives. Nietzsche describes the self as a plurality engaged in a constant internal conflict, a war and a peace, a flock and a shepherd, he says. This challenges the idea of a singular ruler over the self, emphasizing the influence of instincts, desires, and physiological demands. Nietzsche introduces the concept of drives as biological imperative governing human existence. Nietzsche says that self has different needs, and these needs are sometimes complementary or contradictory. As a result, we have what you might call several sub-personalities beneath the surface of consciousness. According to him, consciousness emerges from unconscious physiological drives. This multiplicity of drives distributed throughout the body often leads to a feeling of division and ambivalence, and this is particularly insightful when Ichigo leaves his inner world, almost becoming a hollow. He wears a Shinigami Shihakusho with a hollow mask. This is a representation of his Shinigami and hollow powers, which is used to mask the fact that his Zanpakuto is actually a Reishi construct, a Quincy creation. This has several implications for several characters in the series. Nietzsche's idea of conceptualization of self takes front and center role, specifically in Kenpachi's characterization. The most important thing about Kenpachi is that he doesn't really have a proper name. Zaraki is the name of the forsaken 18th district in Rokongai, a lawless land, and Kenpachi is a title given to the strongest Shinigami. With his name, he rises to the highest ranks of the Koete. For Kenpachi, battle is his will to power. He desires battle. And this understanding is so simple yet so intense, perhaps one can say that Kenpachi was the closest person to enlightenment. However, Kenpachi's adoration of battle leads him to put on himself physical and mental blocks to satiate that thirst of battle, and the utmost significant of these handicaps is his inability to communicate with his Zanpakuto. Up until the Thousand Year Blood War arc, Kenpachi wields an Asauchi. He denies a part of himself to revel in the heat of battle. Despite Kenpachi's denial of the Zanpakuto, it still manifests itself as his closest companion and serves as his assistant captain. This manifestation takes form when he gives the name of the woman he admires the most to a child he finds amongst the corpses. Ironically enough, Ichigo himself doesn't understand the true nature of his Zanpakuto as well. But as he sees Zaraki walking away, Old Man Zangetsu appears, asking him a very important question. Do you want to win or do you want to live? Will to power or will to live? Nietzsche or Schopenhauer? And Ichigo chooses Nietzsche. To convince Ichigo of his identity, Old Man Zangetsu deceitfully presents an Asauchi. However, this is a fabrication. Asauchis are constructs created by Uetsu Nimaya. The presented Asauchi is a Reishi construct, a product of Old Man Zangetsu's Quincy powers akin to Zangetsu used by Ichigo throughout the arc. The manipulation continues as White, the mirror of Ichigo, emerges as his true Zanpakuto spirit. The message is clear. Ichigo's true adversary is himself. He emphasizes that these are not soulless battle tools but extension of one's soul. Internalizing this realization, Ichigo overcomes White by acknowledging the partnership, not through verbal expression but through contemplation, thereby retrieving Zangetsu. This idea is also present in his fight with the brother of the person he is risking his life to save, Byakuya Kuchiki, the personification of legalism. Byakuya assumes the role of both the head of a noble family and the captain of a division, embodying the epitome of Soul Society's profound conformism. His character reflects the enforcement of traditional customs and unwavering rejection of anything that deviates from these customs, irrespective of any moral justifications. Byakuya's concept of justice is confined within the rigid parameters of the Koete 13, characterized by a staunch adherence to the established norms and a resistance to any form of change. Even familial allegiances hold little weight against the law for this man, who staunchly rejects sentimentality and approaches every situation with the utmost rationality. His approach sharply contrasts with Ichigo, who primarily engages in combat driven by passion and emotion. As the head of a noble family, Byakuya is obligated to uphold the law. However, the issue of Rukia's execution transcends Byakuya. It encompasses the entire customs of the Soul Society and the law itself. Ichigo reminds Byakuya of Kaien, a man who had always displeased Byakuya, yet Byakuya ultimately yields to that intensity. Ichigo inherits Kaien's will, breaking Byakuya's blade with his own ferocity, ensuring Byakuya's surrender and abandonment of the pursuit of Rukia's execution. The battle becomes a manifestation of internal conflict, with Ichigo inheriting the will of Kaien, breaking Byakuya's blade with ferocity, and symbolizing an ideological triumph. This internal struggle reveals that even characters seemingly steadfast in their beliefs, like Byakuya and Kenpachi, are not immune to the complexities within themselves, mirroring Nietzsche's portrayal of the self as a constant war of contradictory drives. A character that represents the complex nature of Nietzsche's portrayal of the self is perhaps the most Nietzschean character in the series, Sosuke Aizen. Aizen parallels Ichigo's idea for revalidation devaluation of all values, but rather it's a way for Aizen to staunchly reject the fallacious system that he is part of. While Ichigo's will to power is about his desire to protect and have the strength to protect the people he cares about, Aizen's will to power is his desire to transcend and not be limited by any means. Aizen perfectly encapsulates the idea of the Ubermensch. However, we first need to explore the morality and the multi-layered facets of Sosuke Aizen, and it is here we find the crux of Soul Society's rigid rules in the form of Nietzsche's master-slave morality. Nietzsche distinguishes between two kinds of morality. He comes to the conclusion that Christianity only satisfies one particular aspect of judgment of good and evil. He calls this the slave morality. Slave morals, as he says, are morals that are characteristic of the weak, the feeble, the inferior, the enslaved, which is to say Christianity. And master morals are morals of the warriors, the predatory human beings, the ones who make judgments on the basis of their strength rather than their weakness. Nietzsche argues that Christianity and mythology was organized so as to articulate the perspective of the slaves, and it was a way of having revenge upon the masters. The crux of slave morality, Nietzsche says, is resentment, and this resentment is what led to the inversion of values. The slaves were hungry, while the masters filled their bellies with food. The sin of greed was born. The slaves would beg and plead, while the masters would flaunt their status, therefore the sin of pride was born. This type of morality is present in Aizen's character as he talks about the false in trust and reliance. He views it as an extension of slave morality. However, this is also a contradiction that ultimately leads to Aizen to his defeat. He mocks trust and reliance, but he himself relies on the powers of the Hokyoku to achieve transcendence. He strives to move away from the nature of the Shinigami as he believes that it is this nature that ties the whole Koete to slave morality. Nietzsche also inquires into the differences between the warrior aristocrat who generates the master morality and the priest who manages the slave morality. The psychology of the priest is of great concern to Nietzsche as he believes that the priestly type and the warrior aristocrats are both in fact superior kinds of men. One type is the individual, the Nietzschean hero who is going to adopt the master morality. The most dangerous opponent to the Nietzschean hero is the priest, who is the opposite of the warrior type. Now, what's interesting about Nietzsche's characterization of the warrior and the priest is that you can draw parallels to Ichigo and Ichibe. The Nietzschean hero, or the warrior aristocrats that he dubs, is a person who adopts the master morality, someone who scales their own values. This is Ichigo, considering he is a descendant of the Shiba family, one of the 5 great noble houses. The priest, however, is a person in Nietzsche's own words who takes the resentment of the slaves and formulates it in a mythological way, for it to be used by the herd so that they would be opposed to any type of superiority that would break moral rules among the would-be warriors. What makes the priest character truly terrifying, according to Nietzsche, is the fact that they can dominate culture. In Bleach's story, this manifests itself in the consequence of the original sin, and also Ichibe's powers, the ability to control black and white. Ichibe from within the confines of the manga page hinders the readers and Ichigo of understanding of who Oman Zangetsu truly is. The would-be warrior is an interesting choice of wording because it perfectly reflects Aizen's false godhood. Nietzsche says that losing faith in the idea of God has been a very fundamental issue for him. He emphasized the importance of this with the phrase "God is dead," which is the phrase echo in volume 48 where Aizen and Urahara talk about the Soul King. He also encapsulates the deicide chapters that involve the majority of Aizen's pursuit of transcendence. What Nietzsche meant by this polarizing phrase is the idea of God was now seriously questionable. As a result, people would lose objectivity in their lives, which in turn would lead to a loss of meaning in people's lives, which snowballs into nihilism. Nihilism, however, Nietzsche says, is a blank canvas that one can derive meaning in life from. Nietzsche offers the parable of the camel, the lion, and the child. The camel is burdened by the expectations, hopes, and sensibilities of those around him. Camel eventually evolves into the lion. The lion tears apart the camel in its burdening, leaving only an empty space behind. The lion has the courage to explore the space and within it the nihilistic idea of life. This is where we can be reborn. This is where the lion evolves into the child. We begin anew and find our own ideals and aspirations. This is what Aizen intends to do in pursuit of transcendence with the Hokyoku. As in classical Kubo fashion, Kubo bases Aizen's name in mythology, specifically an Indian deity named Ragaraja, known in Japanese mythology as Aizen Myoo. Notably, this god is renowned for the capacity to transform earthly passions into spiritual enlightenment. Striking parallels emerge in Aizen, who adeptly channels his transcendent passions into his spiritual awakening. Furthermore, Aizen Myoo's ceremonial weapon, the Vajra, renowned for cutting through illusion, serves as a symbolic nod to Aizen's illusory weapon, Kyokasu. Nietzsche advocated for a societal framework that wholeheartedly embraced individuality. He perceived the denial of individuality as a profound existential danger to humanity, recognizing that the essence of individuality inherently entails the existence of inequality. In Nietzsche's view, acknowledging and celebrating the diversity of individual strengths and attributes was integral to the flourishing of a robust and dynamic society. This path, Nietzsche says, will eventually lead to the Übermensch, a being with a resolute rejection of the ideas imposed by those who attempt to confine a person, an unforgiving, radical individual that pursues the idea of their individuality and escapes any pre-existing notions of classifications. This creates an interesting parallel with Aizen and Urahara, who are both scientists and are both aware of the Soul King's existence. In contrast to Aizen's insatiable lust for transcendence, Urahara opts to maintain the status quo, signifying Nietzsche's last man. The last man is content with the status quo and is often driven by herd mentality, conforming to societal norms without questioning or challenging them. Even in terms of Buddhism, Urahara represents the Buddha Vista. This is not only emblematic of his Bankai but also his attitude towards enlightenment, transcendence and fear. The Buddha Vista is a character in Buddhist mythology that has achieved enlightenment in the form of learning the truth about the Soul King, but foregoes nirvana in order to help others through their suffering. Urahara never steps past the edge of reason, rather uses his knowledge to help Ichigo, a person who will reach ultimate enlightenment on his path. Aizen in his own way wanted to develop the Soul Society, in a way that wasn't stuck in the stagnant ways of the past. Nietzsche argues that the advent of metaphysics was an error, in turn not only putting God's existence into question, but also questioning the centuries of first philosophy principles. This is evident in his famous passage called How the True World Became a Fable. Nietzsche says, "The true world, an idea which is no longer good for anything, not even obligating, an idea which has become useless and superfluous, consequently a refuted idea. Let us abolish it. Bright day, breakfast, return to bon sens and cheerfulness, Plato's embarrassed blush, pandemonium of all free spirits." Nietzsche here is announcing the death of God, just like Aizen in his pursuit of transcendence. He mentions Plato blushing because it was essentially Plato that started the idea of metaphysics through his famous allegory of the people in the cave. The cave represents the people perceived through our senses, where people are confined by ignorance and only see the shadow of reality. The shadows on the cave wall represent the illusions and the superficial aspect of the material world that people often mistake for reality. The sun symbolizes the ultimate source of truth, knowledge, and enlightenment, the eternal and unchanging reality behind the changing world of appearances. Here is an interesting dichotomy because Aizen adheres to Plato's idea of true knowledge and wisdom rather than the introspective truth that Nietzsche emphasizes. He chooses the Hokyoku rather than his Zanpakuto that feeds into his false godhood. This realm of forms is related to Aizen's poem of the flower on the precipice. The flower is Aizen, and what he sees past the horizon is the vacant throne of the Soul King. He moves past reason, to strive for greater heights, to sit atop the same throne. Aizen's supposed godhood leads him to completely dehumanize his human characteristics, falsely believing himself to be a transcendent being. This is represented through his relationship with the Espada, who are beings that have been subjected to ideas of false enlightenment. He was hypnotized by Plato's shadow and rejects Nietzsche's shadow. Remember, in Nietzsche's Wanderer character, he emphasizes that the shadow is a representation of self-consciousness. This is the crux of Aizen's contradiction and hypocrisy. Aizen is the Übermensch. However, his internal egoism, represented through his Zanpakuto, something that was a tool of hypnosis, has led himself to believe that he was a god. He was blind to his own egoism. His Zanpakuto, Kyokasyugetsu, translates to mirror, flower, water, moon. This name is derived from a Chinese proverb, flower seen in the mirror, moon reflected on the water's surface, poetically describing the deceptive nature of the ability. It draws a parallel between the visible but unattainable flower within the mirror and the elusive reflection of the moon on water. The metaphor emphasizes the intangibility of these images existing in a different reality beyond our reach. The symbolism extends further with the mirror itself representing truth, a central theme in Aizen's character. Given that a Zanpakuto mirrors a Shinigami's soul, Kyokasyugetsu aligns seamlessly with Sosuke Aizen's mindset, reflecting his contradictory and hypocritical nature unbeknownst to him. The irony emerges from Aizen living with his own perception, denying reality while simultaneously having the power to create false realities. The duality in his eyes reflects Aizen's inherent hypocrisy. His more human-like right eye symbolizes the true reality he deliberately avoids acknowledging, as evidenced by him covering it before his eventual sealing. The right eye is linked to truth while the left eye signifies the false reality he desires. Aizen, in pursuit of a self-constructed reality, aligns himself with the left side, which represents falsehood, rejecting one side while embracing the other. Aizen's failures lies in his refusal to accept the unavoidable nature in life. In his assertion of his superiority, the admiration for himself, it reveals that he never truly understood himself. His bitterness and contempt for the world originates in people that wouldn't even try to understand his perspective. Therefore, Aizen has two wills of power. One is to reach transcendence, and the other is to get rid of his loneliness and find an equal. His own egoism and his refusal to understand himself introspectively is what led to his defeat by the hands of Ichigo Kurosaki, someone who has been going through a diametrically opposed route towards transcendence. The final Getsuga Tensho represents Ichigo's acceptance of a spiritual fusion between Tensa Zangetsu and his hollow powers. Described as to become Getsuga itself, it is an attack where he willingly sacrifices not his powers but also his ability to perceive the supernatural. The name of the attack is Mugetsu, meaning moon the sky. In overcoming Aizen, symbolized as the moon illusion, and unveiling the truth, Ichigo accomplishes the act of piercing the heavens, a literal translation of Getsuga Tensho. Ichigo is again the altruistic child that dived headfirst into danger on the rainy day of July 17th. Aizen's way of breaking away from this nihilism is breaking away from the confines of the eternal cycle of fate. He wants to strive for freedom from the constraints of slave morality, but also have a sense of superiority against others. This contradiction is the key difference in the dynamic between Ichigo's transcendence and Aizen's false transcendence. This also contrasts with Yhwach's idea of a true world, who wants to create a world without the fear of death. However, what that would result in is a world devoid of any meaning, a true nihilistic world. Nietzsche questions whether the metaphysical need is inherent in humanity or acquired through centuries of cultural indoctrination, particularly influenced by Christian ideas. Nietzsche suggests that if metaphysics is a temporal phenomenon with a beginning and progression, it could potentially have an end. Just as there was a pre-metaphysical period before philosophical questions arose, Nietzsche envisions the possibility of a post-metaphysical era for humankind. The primary function of the true world myth in Nietzsche's view is to furnish individuals with a sense of purpose, offering a goal that renders the often transient and painful nature of human existence more bearable. This all ties into Yhwach's plan and Ryo. Ryo acts as the linchpin that holds the three realms in balance. Urahara says that without this bond, this linchpin, this whole system goes down, and this is what Yhwach was aiming to achieve. Yhwach was aiming for the erasure of death. By destroying the system, Yhwach says that people will be liberated from the fear of death, which he sees as a utopia. Yhwach, in a similar vein to Nietzsche, seeks to dismantle the existing order tied to the metaphysical. He means to break down the millions of years of cultural indoctrination of the Soul Society. Both Nietzsche and Yhwach share a skepticism towards the artificially imposed constructs that dictate the meaning of existence. Yhwach is a character that is driven by the fear of death. His origin is synonymous with death itself. Yhwach was a child born blind, voiceless, limp and deaf. Yet he was bestowed with the power of being a god by the masses calling out his name. This notion is an inherent aspect of Bleach which equates to the concept of the recognition of names to the fate that is tied to that individual. This is evident in his name, which is derived from Yahweh. However, his birth instills a fear of death in him. One could contend that the term Yhwach, essentially signifying God, carries a similar meaning to Ichigo, meaning the one who protects. In essence, the concept of a god, particularly in the perception of the masses who bestowed Yhwach with his name, encapsulates the idea of the one who will protect and save us. Despite Yhwach's wish to destroy the metaphysical to pave a way for the true world, his all-seeing eyes couldn't see that he himself is a product of the metaphysical aspect. He is a product of slave morality. This contradictory identity of Yhwach is not only displayed through him, but also through the Sternritters. A compelling illustration of the Sternritter serving as extension of Yhwach is seen in Jugram. Possessing powers akin to Yhwach, Jugram ties his entire value to his ability to serve his lord. Notably, he adopts the Almighty during nighttime, becoming inseparably linked to Yhwach's life and death cycle. This is the reason behind his alignment with Yhwach despite his personal sentiments, as they are essentially two halves of the same person. While it may seem that he's making independent decisions by choosing to align with Yhwach over Basbi, in reality he's merely selecting a new master, a symptom of slave morality. What ultimately led Jugram to kill the only thing he loved was his inherent inability to make decisions and choices. In contrast, Basbi emerges as the stronger figure, because unlike Jugram, he retained the ability to make his own choices until the very end. Lille is a true embodiment of Yhwach's godly essence. Yhwach's description of the Almighty awakening is akin to opening his eyes. Similarly, Lille asserts that after unlocking his left eye, he becomes impervious to weapons and immune to logical constraints. There is a spiritual parallel with Lille's left eye and Shunshui's right eye. Christian mystics and esoteric traditions interpret the loss of the right eye as a symbolic sacrifice for spiritual insight. It may be associated with the idea of self-emptying or surrendering worldly perspectives in favor of a deeper connection with the divine. It's significant for Shunshui's character because he lets go of the childish facade he has been keeping up till this point in the form of his Shikai and finally activates his Bankai. His Shikai manipulates shadow, which is notable because they represent self-consciousness, and in his Bankai all of his trauma and almost suicidal pain is released. The impact of his trauma is most vividly portrayed through his Zanpakuto. Shunshui's Zanpakuto is literally divided into two. reflecting the heavy emotional burden imposed upon him by Nanao's mother. This division serves as a tangible manifestation of his inner conflict. At the core of Shunsui's character is a yearning for connection and the acknowledgement that these connections can bring about pain. This battle is essentially a battle to find purpose in oneself. Lily contends that his purpose as a Quincy and a soldier of Yhwach is not hopeless because he is the messenger of God, again adhering to slave morality. But for Shunsui, he decides to fight through his hopelessness and in turn accept his trauma and open up to Nanao. This in turn allows Nanao and Shunsui to reflect the power of God back at the false messenger. Despite originating as the left arm of the Soul King, Peneida firmly identifies as a Quincy. Peneida governing evolution delves into a concept inherently mortal. The left side carries an inauspicious connotation in numerous cultures. In Western culture, the left side is associated with Satan. Peneida aligns himself with unholiness, while conscripted into the Quincy army, a group associated with holiness. Herein lies the contradictions in Peneida. Peneida, encapsulating a foundational contradiction between the Quincy's perception of their holy war, adds a distinctive dimension to Yhwach's character. Despite being the son of God and eventually assuming the role of God himself, Yhwach lacks any sense of righteousness in his relentless pursuit of war. The narrative unfolds as Mayuri and Nemu reconcile with their identities and flaws. Mayuri serves as a mirror to the pagan deity Baphomet. In Western esotericism, the left-hand path and right-hand path are both opposing approaches to magic. Baphomet is often regarded as a symbol of the left-hand path, representing unconventional and esoteric practices that deviate from societal norms. This fits Mayuri's fertility theme, as Baphomet is often associated with lust and sexuality. Mayuri, firm believer that perfection equates to despair, staunchly advocates for evolution. As a scientist constantly reaching for new heights, he views perfection as an impediment. However, despite these convictions, he experiences a moment of self-forgetfulness. One of Mayuri's objectives is to craft an artificial Shinigami from the ground up, and Nemu emerges at the fruition of his ambition. Conceived by Mayuri, she represents the initial success among 7 attempts to mature into an adult. However, the issue lies in Mayuri's perception of Nemu as the epitome of his creations. Paradoxically, he treats Nemu as if she is flawless. Nemu refutes this belief by showcasing her ability to learn things, aspects Mayuri had never imparted to her. Peneida, while asserting his free will, simultaneously strips his adversaries of their bodily autonomy. His ability to utilize his nerves to seize control of an opponent's nervous system and incapacitate them is closely intertwined with the concept of free will and control. This aspect draws a parallel with Mayuri, whose battle consistently revolve around the theme of control. Peneida helped Mayuri see in himself the inherent hypocrisy he carries around like a badge of honor. However, Peneida itself couldn't see through its inherent contradiction, affirming himself to be a Quincy but rejecting his role as the left arm of the Soul King. Askin sometimes assumes the role of the narrator. He is very different to the rest of the Sternritters, from his design to his attitudes to the whole conflict. Askin's allegiances stem from sheer curiosity about the world Yhwach envisions post-victory. Initially, it appears that every action he takes is a result of his own volition. He notably conducts himself differently, opting out of unnecessary fights when possible. However, it's crucial to recognize that Askin is not a complete narrator. Kubo himself directly undermines Askin's role as the narrator. Referring to Volume 73's author's note, Kubo associates Askin with the motif of an era of warfare. This explains the contradictions in Askin's actions, where he downplays himself while simultaneously establishing his distinctiveness. The essence of Askin's character lies in self-affirmation and overcoming. He seeks to find value in himself beyond the roles assigned to him. The death-dealing ability mirrors the destructive capacity of Askin's mindset, emphasizing his insistence on asserting control over himself and no one else. This becomes evident in his encounter with Kisuke Urahara. Kisuke is emblematic of self-assurance, understanding both his strengths and weaknesses, and forming contingencies based on those aspects. He embraces freedom and acknowledges his imperfections, contrasting with Askin, who seeks these qualities. Through Askin's non-participation, he becomes a victim of stagnation. Asno serves as a direct embodiment of Yhwach's fear. This parallels Yhwach's own narrative, reflecting his fear of mortality and the empowerment he sought to overcome it. Byakuya and Asno share a parallel similar to Ichigo and Zangetsu. Zangetsu's metaphor of the king and his horse delves into the concept of the division of consciousness that is reminiscent of Nietzsche's idea of subpersonalities. Zangetsu's response centers on instinct. As the representative of the shadow, Zangetsu suggests that control over one's shadow requires awareness. Zangetsu warns Ichigo that if he fails to govern his instincts, Zangetsu will seize control instead. Byakuya embodies the conscious mind governed by logic and reason, whereas Asno represents the untamed animalistic subconscious. Aznot brings attention to Byakuya's belief that years of training and discipline have eradicated fear from his being. However, Aznot, who perpetually experiences fear, is at least aware of it, unlike Byakuya, who has become oblivious to it. This theme resonates with the Soul Society arc, where both Byakuya's initial and final battles grapple with his inclination to suppress emotions, rendering him blind to his true feelings. His desire to save Rukia surpassed his commitment to the law, yet Byakuya ignored this in an attempt to fulfill the wishes of his deceased parents. Once more, Rukia becomes the focal point of Byakuya's internal struggle with his emotions. Having reconciled with her, he succumbs to the fear of losing her. In both instances, Byakuya's tendency to distance himself from Rukia leaves him oblivious to his own emotions. Aznot's words echoes Angetsu's words. Fear is an inherent aspect of life, intertwined with bravery. One cannot exist without acknowledging their shadow and instincts. The same principle applies to the coexistence of happiness and pain, as well as life and death. Byakuya's defeat stems from his refusal to accept this truth, which Aznot, existing in a perpetual state of fear and pain, has grappled with throughout his life. While Aznot may not control his fear, he is cognizant of it. Until Byakuya confronts the part of himself that he fears and understands that true control is behind him, victory remains beyond his reach. Enter Rukia, one of the namesakes of the series. Rukia's character arc is entirely tied to her nature as a Shinigami. She seeks out affirmations and familial connections, but she never receives them. Therefore, she seeks this through validation in her Shinigami work. The kindness that Rukia consistently exhibits is because of Kaien's counsel to her regarding the heart, a very important metaphysical aspect of the series that is embedded in the narrative. Rukia has struggled with finding her place. Her Ryatsu made her an outsider in the Rokongai, and her treatment as an outsider in the Kuchiki clan left her without a sense of belonging. This is precisely why she adopts a submissive demeanor, believing her agreeable nature should secure her a place despite the harsh and unwelcoming circumstances. Kaien's assertion that her rightful place is wherever her heart lies provides the push she needed to fight for what she held dear, her friends. Rukia gradually becomes more assertive throughout the arcs, but it is in the Thousand Year Blood War arc that her character undergoes the complete realization. During this arc, Rukia takes the spotlight as she confronts Aznot. In alignment with this theme of self-discovery and enlightenment, Rukia, following her training at the Ryo Palace, unveils the true potential of a Zanpakuto. Rukia convincingly overcomes Aznot using her Bankai, Hakka no Togame. This Bankai puts her in a position of power, a stark contrast to her previous subservient self. Sodeno Shirayuki translates to sleeves of white snow, and her Bankai incorporates a significant amount of white in both name and appearance. The explicit association of the Kuchiki clan with the color white underscores its characterization as a clan defined by purity and a strong commitment to law and order. This theme is consistently highlighted notably by Byakuya Kuchiki, who takes great pride in his noble status and sees it as his duty to guide others on the righteous path. Despite the recognizable black shihakusho worn by Shinigami, captains distinguish themselves with white hayori, which symbolizes their authority to enforce justice. These elements collectively signify that Rukia has ascended to a position of authority, embodying the implicit purpose of the Kuchiki clan as nobles dedicated to upholding justice. There are hints that Aznot's affliction stems from surviving the Ashwelin, making Yhwach the cause of both his fear and paradoxically his salvation. Yhwach bestowed power upon Aznot to help him escape his fear. Yhwach's own fear of death originates from his aversion to returning to a state of powerlessness and disability. He actively initiates battle to secure his continued existence. In this sense, akin to Aznot, Yhwach becomes the architect of his own fear, viewing power as a literal mean to escape the looming specter of death. Uryu's shrift bears the same letter A as Yhwach's Almighty, creating a fitting connection between them. The antithesis allows Uryu to reverse events that have occurred between two specific points, serving as a direct counter to Yhwach's power of altering the future. Uryu's backstory is the key to his internal conflict during the Thousand Year Blood War, revealing an inescapable adversity that he must confront. Throughout Uryu's childhood, his father Ryuken presented himself as a cold, heartless doctor who detested the Quincy ways. However, Ryuken's true disdain for Quincy stemmed from their inevitable suffering, the circumstances of his wife's death, and the anticipated suffering for Uryu if he embraced the Quincy path. Contrary to Ryuken's intentions, Soken, Uryu's grandfather, designated him as the chosen one with a destiny to fulfill. All Quincy subjected to the Ashwelin developed a silver thrombus in the heart, leading to their demise. Uryu received an arrowhead made of this silver from his father, accompanied by the instruction that he alone should fire it. Ryuken's dissection of Katagiri was not a doctor's duty, but rather a part of his role as a Quincy. Uryu, acknowledging his destiny, confronts Yhwach, fighting for the ideals his grandfather pursued, bridging the gap between the races and establishing peace. His fight extends beyond duty. It becomes a quest for friendship, particularly with Ichigo. The bond shared between them, coupled with Ichigo's ability to unveil Uryu's insecurities and guilt, liberated Uryu from his suffering and allowed him to find common ground with the Shinigami, aligning with Soken's vision. Through Yhwach's assertion and following the Quincy prophecy, he unlocks the Almighty. Up until this point, Yhwach has been fighting with his eyes closed. He stands as the quintessential embodiment of fatalism within the Bleach narrative. Through the use of the Almighty, he assumes the role of the determiner of destinies, wherein all autonomy is stripped away by the commanding influence of his eyes. Everything seemingly conforms to his design, with Yhwach emerging as the very force that relentlessly pushes the course of fate, a figurative crushing wheel that orchestrates events with an inevitability that reflects the essence of fatalism. Yhwach is everything un-Nietzschean. He is a deterministic menace that is looming over the precipice of the destruction of the current world order, who unbeknownst to him is a product of slave morality due to his lack of any introspection. He destroys Ichigo's newly acquired Bankai. Ichigo once again falls to the despair of fatalism, almost a mirror to when he was defeated by Grand Fisher. However, this again is a beautiful contradiction in Yhwach's character that he fails to see with his all-seeing eyes. When Ichigo cuts down Soul King Yhwach, he was the acting Soul King because he absorbed Ryo, therefore becoming the same prisoner of fate that he sought to escape from. This contrast is more pronounced in Yhwach's role as the stark antithesis of the story's central themes. In a narrative where the discovery and acceptance of one's identity holds the utmost significance, having the ultimate antagonist embody a character inherently incapable of asserting individual agency, constrained by an identity imposed upon them, aligns seamlessly with the overarching message. Yhwach's profound fear of death and his ambition to forge a world devoid of mortality stands in stark contrast to Ichigo's courage in confronting mortality and his willingness to endure life's challenges with the confines of the inevitable cycle of life and death. While Yhwach's dream of a utopia free from death carries a noble aspiration, it raises a poignant question. Can a world stripped of problems where despair is eradicated truly be considered a life? Yhwach's envisioned realm may eliminate every conceivable human woe, ensuring perpetual peace by eradicating conflict. However, in the absence of challenge, life loses its profound meaning and purpose. His lack of introspection is his downfall. It serves as a fitting culmination of Yhwach's character, a man ensnared by arrogance. The silver substance found in the heart of the Ashwelin victims, known as the Silver of Stillness, possesses a unique ability. By mixing it with the blood of the one who activated the Ashwelin, all of that person's abilities for a brief moment will cease to exist. This item plays a role almost identical to the Hogyoku, contributing to the downfall of the main villain. Both are products of the creator's hubris, serving as an instrument of their undoing. Throughout the story, Kubo has presented the heart as something intangible and formless. It's where people derive their wills to power from. However, the Almighty granted Yhwach to observe this very heart, therefore rendering it meaningless. This prevented Yhwach from doing any introspection, and it is why he wasn't able to see the Silver Arrow, a weapon that is derived from Yhwach's own life and death cycle. Ichigo's blade, marred with cracks and imperfections, dissipates upon contact with Yhwach's overwhelming Ryatsu. However, beneath the external layer lies the false Shikai crafted by All Man Zangetsu for Ichigo, the only blade capable of defeating Yhwach according to his own admission. This is the same blade Yhwach foresaw in a dream passed on by Jugram, symbolizing Ichigo's Quincy powers stemming from a place of Yhwach within him. In a turn of events, this representation of Yhwach's heart within Ichigo turns against itself. The fragment of Yhwach embedded in Ichigo's soul becomes the key to his downfall, a consequence of the man who spent considerable time seeing the world through Ichigo's eyes. Yhwach's all-seeing eyes reflect only his hubris in the closing moments, showcasing his failure to introspect. The bond found between Ichigo and the heart of Yhwach within him, now an integral part of him, unfolds an unforeseen path, a path beyond Yhwach's foresight. Yhwach's lack of introspection is contrasted brilliantly with arguably the best Ichigo moment, the blade is me. Before this moment, Ichigo never truly understood himself. He only attempted to understand to the extent that he needed to. This is shown beautifully through Mugetsu, which also bears parallels to The Blade is Me. In contrast, The Blade is Me represents a moment of complete self-acceptance, overcoming, and sincerity. The Zanpakuto, once a mere tool to achieve its objective, is now an integral part of Ichigo himself. The Asauchi, previously resistant and unyielding, now bow in acceptance without engaging in battle. As receptors of the soul, they absorb Ichigo's resolute spirit. The hollow, once perceived as a savage menace causing chaos, transforms into a symbol of his mother's humanity. It embodies something beyond its primal nature. In the course of the final Getsuga Tensho training, Ichigo finally grasps that the spirits within him, the powers utilized for the well-being of others, genuinely genuinely care for him and aspire to protect him. However, Ichigo still falls short of acknowledging them as integral part of himself. The Blade is Me allows Ichigo to attain a profound understanding of every aspect of his spiritual composition. He has become the orchestrator of his inner reality. Old Man Zangetsu, serving as the representation of Yhwach within Ichigo and proof of his Quincy lineage, is essentially Zangetsu, his Zanpakuto. Likewise, White, embodying both the artificial hollow created by Aizen and fused with Masaki, along with his father's Shinigami powers melded to it, is once again Zangetsu. Both entities are Zangetsu, both are Ichigo, both are also Masaki. How ironic is it that the two people integral in taking out Yhwach came from the progeny of the two Ashvalan victims? Ichigo's character growth is intricately linked with his ability to overcome the fear of the unknown, specifically his fear of death and past traumas. Drawing parallels to Nietzsche's Wanderer, Ichigo undergoes a transformative journey akin to the pursuit of knowledge and truth. The concluding panel of Bleach features Buddha's footprints, symbolizing the enlightened one leaving an enduring mark on the world for others to follow. The footprint bears the word brave, synonymous with courage, a trait exemplified by Ichigo in the face of literal darkness. Ichigo's victory over Yhwach, achieved with his original Shikai that accompanied him for the majority of the series, reflects his trust and gratitude for the power bestowed upon him. This power facilitated his transformative journey, leading him to discover his true self. In defeating Yhwach, Ichigo not only confronted fear and despair, but also forged a path of hope, demonstrating that true courage lies in facing adversity and finding hope within the shadows.